Hey guys, today we're going to be talking about the economy of the West, focusing specifically on the three main industries out there, farming, mining, and ranching. So life as a farmer out in the West was not super easy. Even though the Homestead Act, which we've talked about a lot, promised to give free land to basically any man who was willing to go out there with his family and set up. It's a pretty rough deal. So about 500,000 families take up the offer of the Homestead Act and go out there and get their 160 acres. And about 5 million other people go ahead and just buy land out west. And the life out there, even though they had expected it to be pretty great, turned out to be really very difficult. First of all, the plains out there were pretty dry, and they got drier and drier as you went west. And the only way to make them fertile involved a number of new techniques, such as using like really, really heavy plows to churn the soil. Worked at first, but they also slowly damaged the soil and made it harder and harder to farm in the long run. And on top of all of this, prices for farm products, especially grain, got lower and lower as time went on and made it harder and harder for the farmers to survive, even as their land was more and more damaged by their farming techniques. So in spite of all of its promise, the West actually was pretty bad for a lot of the people that moved out there at first. Things do get better over time, and some of the improvements that happen have helped turn the West today into a major farming center. First is irrigation. Irrigation is bringing water to the farm. And how they did this out west is they would dig big wells, which then would allow farmers to water their crops more frequently. They also invented mechanical reapers, which were big machines for harvesting the crops easily. And also, as railroads expanded, it became easier and easier to ship your grain out and bring in supplies and equipment. So it was a hard life, but it got easier over time. This was a really important invention because harvesting crops usually required a ton of work, but with this, one guy could harvest tons and tons of wheat all by himself. Another major industry was mining, and mining out west followed a basic pattern. Gold was discovered somewhere, and thousands of people from out east would flock there trying to get rich quickly. We saw this in California in 1949, and we see it again in Colorado and Nevada in 1859. Nevada is especially famous for its silver. So much silver is discovered there at the Comstock lode that it's basically the reason Nevada becomes a state. And most other western states, New Mexico, Montana, Idaho, all have their own gold or silver rushes. And what happens here is that at first, these towns and these mining communities are essentially just collections of individuals. People from all over the place show up, set up a little house, buy a shovel and some tools, and get to work mining. But what happens is as metals become rarer and rarer, it's harder and harder for an individual dude with hand tools to make any money. And later on, bigger businesses with fancy new industrial tools move in to pick up the slack and to continue extracting gold. And this has a pretty significant effect on the United States. One, all of these discoveries pump all sorts of wealth into the US economy. The Colorado and Nevada gold and silver strikes definitely helped the United States during the Civil War, as they're able to finance the war largely with wealth generated from these mines. Also, this quickly leads to an increase in Western populations as people flock out west, and it creates a new market for industrial machinery. As people are moving out there, they demand railroads and they demand special mining equipment that is produced out east in factories and then shipped westward. prospector in the 1950s, 1960s. So look, he's got his little cabin set up. He's going out for the day with his tools, and he's gonna maybe find some gold. And the last major industry of the West was ranching. That is growing, raising cattle for their beef. So originally it was impossible to raise beef out west because there was no way to get the cow meat to the city where you would sell it. And so what this meant was that it wasn't that much money to be made from the beef industry. But this all changes around 1865 because of two breakthroughs. One is the Transcontinental Railroad, which now runs through the middle of the country, and the other is a refrigerated ice car, which makes it possible to ship slaughtered cows wherever they need to go. So how this would work is, if you were a cowboy, or you and a bunch of other cowboys would get together with all your cows and ship them, basically drive them, herd them hundreds of miles up through Texas, through Indian Territory, and to one of these towns that lay along the Transcontinental Railroad. And those cows would then be loaded up and they would be shipped off to a big city. Chicago was a famous city for this. And the cows would all be slaughtered there at these giant slaughterhouses. And then they'd be cut up and shipped all over the eastern United States in iced rail cars. And this was a great way to make a good amount of money. You could raise a bunch of cows down on your property and then drive them northward. And so this worked really well for a while, for about 20 years, until settlers started settling in this area between Texas and the Transcontinental Railroad. And what this meant was that they could no longer herd their cows, and so this sort of business of cowboys was sort of dried up. And it was replaced by sort of big beef business. And what this was Texas ranchers would, instead of grazing their cattle on open plains, would keep them fenced off and would raise their cows there. And pretty soon there were railroads running through Texas, so they could just load their cows right onto the rail line right there and make their money that way. But so that was the age of the cowboy. When the long drive was going on, that's what cowboys were doing. And let's talk a little bit about the effects of westward expansion. So if you look at this map here, you'll see sort of an economic map of what was going on in the United States. So the red represent the different important resources coming out of the West. In the north there you see wheat being raised, in the south you see beef, and out in the deep west, in the deserts and mountains, you see metals. And so all three of these are being shipped using the railroads, or in the case of the metals, sometimes boats leaving from California, to the rest of the US economy. And so this is pumping food and wealth into the rest of the United States. And in exchange for this, what you see is the East supplies the West with labor and manufactured goods. So people and stuff from their factories go out west. And this is a pretty beneficial situation for both sides. So the United States has tons of food, tons of metals, lots of factories, and lots of labor. And it gets even better because during this time period there are still millions of immigrants coming into major US cities. And so the United States is really set up here to become a major world power. They're unified, they have all the resources and all the people that they need. And that's one reason why the West really helps the United States to grow and develop as a country.